In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Welcome to our new episode on Pentecost. Today we will contemplate on Jesus' resurrection left a footprint within history. In reading the resurrection chapters of the four Gospels, the differences between the accounts are very obvious. Not one of the evangelists recounts the actual resurrection itself. It is an event that is taking place within the mystery of God between Jesus and the Father. What lessons can we learn about the resurrection from each of the Gospel accounts, particularly from Matthew's story that we hear proclaimed today? Mark's call to the cross. In the earliest Gospel account, in Mark's Gospel, chapter 13, the last scene is a startling one, for the story ends with, "The woman came out and fled from the tomb, for they were possessed by fear and trembling, and they said nothing to anyone." The most striking aspect of Mark's ending is that we never encounter the risen Lord. Instead, we see an awe-inspiring, almost eerie scene. The darkness of early morning, the women arrive at the tomb to accomplish a nearly impossible task. These women are the only ones who follow Jesus to the foot of the cross and to the tomb. They find the tomb open and empty and are greeted by a heavenly figure who gives them a commission. Go and tell his disciples and Peter that he goes before you into Galilee. There you will see him as he told you. Mark's resurrection account is meant to distract the Christian reader, to undo the ease that makes one forget that the call to discipleship is the call to the cross. Readers of Mark's account are invited to view their lives in the shadow of the cross. Matthew's living Christ. Matthew tells the story of the resurrection in four scenes: the woman's experience at the tomb, their short encounter with the risen Lord, the Jewish leaders' attempt to suppress the story, and number 4, the appearance to the disciples in Galilee. Also, the ending with the Great Commission stands on its own as a promulgatic conclusion to the entire Gospel. The woman present in Matthew's resurrection chapter do not witness the resurrection. They do experience the earthquake, the appearance of the angel, and the emptiness of the tomb, all of which are signs or traces of divine activity that has brought these things about. Now, Matthew literally marks Jesus present in the last scene of the Gospel on the mountain where Jesus had directed the disciples to go. And at the end of the Gospel, he points us back to the first programmatic sermon of Jesus on the mountain in Galilee. Matthew's meek and humble Jesus is the teacher as well as the example of meekness and humility. In revising Mark's Gospel, Matthew deliberately completes the picture of Jesus and of the Christian life. The bleak image and invitation of the cross and the dead Jesus are filled out with a living and present Jesus, whose words reflected upon the scriptures of Israel offer a consoling and learnable way for those disciples willing to learn. The Matthew issues to call to learn of the meek and humble Jesus. Luke's symphony. The Easter chapter of Luke's Gospel in 24, like a beautiful symphony, presents us with a biblically oriented pastoral practice and distinct way of Christian living. In the first movement, God alone breaks open a helpless situation. In the second movement of the marvelous story of Jesus, and the disciples on the road to Emmaus. God, in the person of Jesus, accompanies people on their journeys through despair. The stories of the third movement lead people into an experience of community. John's risen Lord. John tells of appearances of the risen Lord in both Jerusalem and Galilee. The resurrection stories of the fourth gospel are a series of encounters between Jesus and his followers that reveal diverse faith reactions. Whether these encounters are with Simon Peter and the beloved disciple, Mary Magdalene, the disciples of Thomas, the whole scenario reminds us that in the range of belief, there are different degrees of readiness and different factors that cause people to come to faith. Let's contemplate on the following points. Jesus did not simply return to normal biological life as one who, by the laws of biology, would eventually have to die again. Jesus is not a ghost. In other words, he does not belong to the realm of the dead, but is somehow able to reveal himself in the realm of the living. The encounters with the risen Lord are not the same as mystical experiences, in which the human spirit is momentarily drawn aloft out of itself and perceives the realm of the divine and eternal, only to return then to the normal horizon of its existence. Mystical experience is a temporary removal of the soul's spatial and cognitive limitations. The resurrection is a historical event that nevertheless bursts open the dimensions of history and transcends it. As something that breaks out of history and transcends it, the resurrection nevertheless has its origin within history and up to a certain point still belongs there. Perhaps we could put it this way. Jesus' resurrection points beyond history, but has left a footprint within history. Therefore, it can be attested by witnesses as an event of an entirely new kind. In our highly technological world, the reality of the resurrection becomes increasingly difficult to understand. So, many spend their lives explaining it away rather than probing the depths of its mystery. And they try to do this alone, separated from the believing community of Christians, locked in the prison of self and of ideas, frozen before a computer screen as they try to understand what happened on Easter morning. Some people state quite frankly that the whole story is simply out of date. But the resurrection is not a matter of the head, of theory and ideas, but a matter of the heart that can only be experienced and learned through a community's worship and liturgy. To be fully experienced and grasped, the resurrection requires an environment of hauntingly beautiful music, of smoke and incense, bread and wine, murmurs of greeting and shouts of joy, dazzling colors, and most of all, three-dimensional bodies of real people. Even those who aren't necessarily regulars of our parish communities, who gather together every year to hear the Easter proclamation. One doesn't sit at a computer and tap out, Jesus is risen. It has to be performed and enacted. If the resurrection were meant to be a historically verifiable occurrence, God wouldn't have performed it in the dark without eyewitnesses. The resurrection was an event translated between God the Father and God the Son by the power of God the Holy Spirit. Well, that's all we have for you today. God bless you and take care, and we'll see you in our next program on Pentecost.